In November 1997, the Nists from Trenton, New Jersey, were gearing up for their annual cruise tradition, a practice they had cherished since their wedding 6 years prior. Julie, 29, and her husband Tim, 40, decided to switch things up this year, celebrating Christmas during their voyage. Their main goal was to strengthen their bond, so they left their 1-year-old daughter, Kaylee, with grandparents and headed to San Juan, Puerto Rico on November 1st to board their cruise ship. George Skiadopoulos, a crew member, was immediately struck by Julie's vibrant and attractive presence. Teased by a colleague that she was out of his league, George wagered he could romantically engage with Julie. Although just a junior engineer, 22-year-old George, freshly out of college, carried himself with enough poise to intrigue Julie. He misrepresented himself as the captain, exaggerating his age to 28 and fabricating achievements to impress her. Julie and George quickly grew close, meeting daily on deck, engaging in captivating conversations. Julie, swept up in the cruise's romantic ambience and George's charismatic tales, didn't realize his true identity. Tim, accustomed to his wife's sociable nature, observed their interactions but felt no jealousy. One evening, amid a lively party on the ship, George invited Julie for a tour of the ship. Initially hesitant, she eventually agreed. In the deserted engine room, a spark ignited between them, culminating in a kiss. However, their relationship did not progress beyond kissing for the duration of the cruise. Back home, Julie confided her feelings to a family friend, Tony, expecting her attraction to fade since she and George would likely never meet again. Unexpectedly, George, the captain, sent Julie a message. Their daily phone conversations soon followed, with George insinuating that Tim wasn't worthy of her. Tim occasionally caught them talking, but trusted Julie enough not to probe further. Torn between her stable family life and the thrilling new emotions George stirred in her, Julie became distant from friends and even cold to her daughter. Concerned, Tim noticed the changes in her. Hoping to rekindle their connection, Tim planned a surprise 30th birthday party for Julie on January 3rd, 1998. It was a lavish affair attended by many friends. Julie's request for another cruise on a specific ship and date was her ploy to reunite with George. Reluctantly, Tim agreed, and they embarked on February 13th. On that voyage, during a dark night, George won the bet he had made with his crewmates. Julie's intimate encounter with George during the cruise left her head over heels. Back home, she excitedly confided in Tony, a close family friend and godfather to her daughter, Katie. Tony struggled with the burden of keeping her secret, later admitting this to Julie. Despite the risk of exposure, Julie decided to secretly meet George, for whom she yearned intensely. She concocted a family vacation pretext, bringing along her mother and daughter. Julie had to confess her secret affair to her mother, facing her disapproval, but she was undeterred. Initially, they went to Florida, but on March 26, 1988, Julie left her mother and daughter behind to continue her romantic escapade with George in Puerto Rico. Upon returning, Julie's communication with George became almost public. They talked incessantly on the phone and exchanged risky love letters via email. Julie even recorded videos showcasing her life for George, all under her husband Tim's nose, with whom she continued to live and spend his money. She also resumed partying and drinking. Tim couldn't help but notice the changes in their family dynamics and suggested seeing a marriage counselor after 7 years of marriage. During their first session, Julie announced her desire for a divorce, which Tim opposed due to their shared business interests that were generating significant income. Julie knew she needed finances for her plan to move to Greece with her daughter and start a new life with her lover, who was due to serve a compulsory 20-month military service in Greece. Julie attempted to help him flee and secure a U.S. but she lacked sufficient funds. For her new boyfriend, Julie began a fitness regimen, experiencing sleep issues and resorting to strong sleeping pills. Amid emotional turmoil, she also started taking antidepressants. George, learning about this, was furious and forbade her from using them. Julie lost about 10 kilograms, aiming to return to modeling to earn money, but George, unlike Tim, was intensely jealous and did not support this idea, forcing Julie to abandon her plans. Almost everyone, including Cheryl, who once helped Julie enter the modeling industry, disapproved of her relationship with the Greek man. They had witnessed the evolution of Julie and Tim's life since they first met at an exclusive yacht club party in July 1989. Tim, 11 years her senior, was a successful businessman with his own company and a new yacht. He had established his landscape design company in the early 80s, flourishing alongside the U.S. real estate market boom. Initially, their relationship thrived, but Julie's jealousy was evident. Once, Tim waited for her at a bar with another woman, and upon Julie's arrival, she assaulted Tim, leaving a bruise on his face, and attacked the woman. It turned out she was the secretary of a man Tim had worked with for years, merely assisting in business matters. The conflict was resolved at that time. Tim was taken aback one day when he arrived at his office to find Julie sitting at his secretary's desk. With her charming smile, she announced that the former employee would no longer be working there, effectively usurping her boyfriend's job and leaving him little choice but to accept her as his new assistant. This allowed her to work from home, granting her more freedom, including financially. Julie had always dreamt of being a model. One day she spotted a beauty contest advertisement in a newspaper and decided to participate, confident she would win and supported by her loving partner Tim. They compiled Julie's best photos and sent them to the magazine organizing the contest. However, it turned out to be a scam by the publishers to obtain free photos for their men's section at the back of the magazine. Julie eagerly awaited a response from the publishers about the contest, but it never came. Determined, she visited the magazine office and confronted the editor about her prize. He accepted her photos and promised to feature them in the next issue. Julie shared the story with everyone, preparing for the competition. The event took place at an elite hotel with 12 finalists, including Julie. Despite her efforts, only one judge voted for her. However, this experience helped her befriend the magazine editor Cheryl, leading to Julie becoming the magazine's face and appearing on billboards across the city. As her fame grew, Julie began receiving modeling offers, becoming a local celebrity until the autumn of 1990. She still worked for Tim and won some smaller beauty contests, but struggled on the larger stage. On November 16, 1991, Julie, then 23, and Tim decided to get married. The couple led an active life, not restricting themselves in any way. By 1997, Julie's modeling career was growing, increasing her income. She began appearing on TV, but unfortunately, started abusing alcohol. Their marriage had its ups and downs, but they generally maintained a mutual understanding and love. Tim wanted children, and they were financially stable enough to provide for a child, but Julie was hesitant, not wanting to risk her modeling career. However, in February 1995, Julie became pregnant. Her friends said she continued to drink and smoke throughout her pregnancy. On November 26, 1996, the Nist family welcomed a daughter, Katie Scarlett. Becoming a mother profoundly changed Julie. She embraced her new role. During this time, her mother, Julia, actively helped with Katie's upbringing, though they often disagreed on parenting approaches. Julie soon experienced postpartum depression, partly due to the significant changes in her figure after pregnancy. She withdrew into herself, not attempting to return to her previous condition. Around this time, her relationship with Tim began to deteriorate. By April 1997, they sought family therapy. Julie felt the therapist sided with Tim, but the specialist genuinely tried to address her issues and complexes, uncovering unpleasant aspects of her past. Eventually, the therapist stated that Tim wasn't giving his wife enough attention, leading their marriage to the brink of collapse. Feeling lonely, Julie started socializing with friends more and often came home intoxicated. During this tumultuous time, Tim, following the family therapist's advice, decided to take Julie on a cruise, hoping it would rekindle the warmth and passion in their relationship. However, his hopes were dashed as Julie's newfound passion for another man continued to erode their family life and her own well-being. Due to her secret affair, Julie's mental state worsened. One day, Tim was unable to access important business documents because Julie wouldn't let him into her room. The situation escalated to the point where he had to call the police, and despite Julie's active resistance, Jim retrieved what he needed. Julie developed paranoid thoughts, believing Tim had hired a private detective to follow her. The household atmosphere grew tense, and it became clear that divorce was inevitable. In midsummer, George and Julie met in the States and secretly got engaged. Julie didn't hide her plans to move to Greece, but intended to do so the following year. Around this time, Tim discovered international phone bills totaling $7,000 per month. He finally realized his wife was having an affair with the cruise ship engineer and had been communicating with him behind his back. Furious, Tim decided to divorce Julie, eager to sever all ties with her. In response, Julie tried to restrict Tim's access to their daughter, aiming for full custody to freely move to another country, but Tim resisted. As the couple tried to sort out their issues, Julie's new lover George announced he had quit his job and was coming to visit her in New Jersey. The continuous arguments and conflicts with Tim stressed Julie to the point of hair loss, but she believed it was due to being apart from George. She also became jealous of George's interactions with other women and demanded constant contact with him. When George arrived in New Jersey, their relationship spiraled into chaos. He constantly inquired about money and persuaded her to spend more, forcing Julie to ask Tim for funds, further limiting her interaction with her daughter, which greatly irritated Tim. George frequently lied about his financial status, and it was surprising how unremarkable he appeared, making Julie's infatuation with him even more bizarre. Friends and family strongly advised Julie against the relationship, unable to comprehend how she fell for a balding, unemployed, hopeless man with bad teeth, who was also manipulative and extremely jealous. Nonetheless, Julie was smitten. She even planned to use her divorce settlement to finance George's hair transplant and dental work. When Tim learned of all this, he was furious that Julie was involving their daughter in the situation. He threatened that if she tried to leave, he would take Katie and Julie would never see her daughter again. This threat seemed to somewhat cool Julie's ardor. She even told friends that her relationship with George had ended, but it didn't last long. Within weeks, she went to Greece with George to test their relationship. They met his parents, and Julie was thrilled with the weekend, hiding her marital status, daughter's existence, and modeling career due to George's parents' religious beliefs. Back home, Julie dreamed of finalizing her divorce and starting a new life with George. On December 6th, she received the divorce decree and was ready to leave the home she shared with Tim. She left Katie and checked into a hotel where she used large amounts of drugs. On December 8th, Julie traveled to Greece to get married and start a new life with George. George quickly convinced her to open a joint bank account, citing his lack of knowledge of the Greek language. Blinded by love, Julie deposited $80,000 into the account, giving George another $18,000 in cash for additional expenses. All her money. After that, she disappeared without a trace. On January 8th, George called a friend of Julie's to inform him that Julie had disappeared. He said they were supposed to meet outside a McDonald's for a meal, but Julie never showed up and he waited for hours. With no cell phones, he was unable to contact her and reported her missing to police. A short time later, Julie called the same friend and told him about her longing for Kathy and problems with her fiancé. The friend assumed that Julie was planning to leave George and return soon, but Julie never returned to the U.S., and George's call raised serious concerns. He claimed that Julie had disappeared without her passport, allegedly left in her car, and then taken away by the police. However, he could find no witnesses to confirm that the police had taken the passport. It all sounded very dubious, so the friend turned to Tim, the only one who could help. Tim immediately realized that his ex-wife was in serious trouble. She had last contacted relatives in the U.S. on January 7th. There had been no word from her since then, adding to the fears. The police began combing the neighborhood, interviewing possible witnesses, but Julie had no acquaintances in the new place, so they questioned her relatives in New Jersey and looked into her background. Julia Scully, daughter of Julia and John Scully, was born on January 3, 1968. She developed a very close relationship with her father, willing to do anything for his approval. Father and daughter spent much time together, often going fishing. However, on November 10, 1969, Julie's younger brother, John Patrick Scully, was born, withdrawing all the parental affection, leaving Julie feeling neglected. Julie's mother hailed from a Native American reservation in New Mexico, one of the largest tribes in the United States. Life there was challenging with no electricity or running water, high unemployment, and rampant alcoholism and drug abuse. This led Julie's parents to send her to a boarding school at age 12, hoping to provide her with a better life through English education. Upon reaching adulthood, Julia moved to the city, attempting to adapt to mainstream American life. While working at a psychiatric facility, she became entangled in the world of drugs. During this time, she met a police officer named John in 1964. Their romance blossomed quickly, and they married on July 2, 1965, just 2 days before their anniversary. John later became a patrol officer in one of North Philadelphia's most dangerous neighborhoods. Julia fell pregnant and gave birth to a daughter. John lovingly cared for his daughter, often leaving Julia feeling isolated from the family life. She kept her drug addiction a secret, though her erratic and unpredictable behavior occasionally surfaced. Her situation worsened as she delved into more dangerous drugs. Meanwhile, feeling constantly tired and unable to quit without experiencing severe withdrawal symptoms, Julia soon fell pregnant again, and a younger son joined the family. Already depleted, Julia Scully found it challenging to care for him. In 1973, during a bout of depression, she overdosed on sleeping pills. John found her in time and called for medical help, saving her life. This incident brought her problem to light within the family, complicating matters further. Once a beautiful Native American woman, she now resembled a shadow of her former self. Another suicide attempt followed, but again, she was saved. The turmoil within her parents' relationship didn't go unnoticed by the elder daughter, who was 9 years old at the time. On Julie's birthday, her father abruptly left, leaving behind his wife and guests. He was having an affair and sought escape from Julia's addiction, which repulsed him. He stayed only for the sake of their children. His mistress arrived to pick him up, and both Julia and their daughter saw them as they followed John out. John's blatant disregard for the secrecy of his affair deeply hurt both his daughter and wife. Julie blamed herself for her family's troubles, unable to understand the situation's true nature. Julie, who had always been an excellent student, started facing academic troubles. She became popular among her peers and fell into a bad crowd. Her attendance and performance at school declined. Seeing this, her father decided to transfer her to a new school in Kensington. At 12, Julie's attractiveness garnered a lot of attention from boys. The Scully family lived in a troubled neighborhood, heightening her parents' concerns about her future and the risk of falling into substance abuse like her mother. One evening, when Julie's friends were supposed to sleep over, she disappeared from her room with them. When her mother discovered their absence, she panicked and called the police, who found the children in downtown Philadelphia. Julie's relationship with her mother worsened, leading to regular conflicts and scandals. Her rebellious spirit also manifested towards her father, despite their close bond. As a police officer, he always knew where and with whom his daughter spent her time. Seeing his wife's failure in raising their children, he took custody of them while sending Julia to rehab for drug addiction. The family environment became calmer during her absence. Despite Julie's efforts to please her father, her rebellious spirit grew as she matured. She continued spending time with friends, leading to skipped classes and poor grades. Her father, infuriated upon learning this, was dismayed, especially since Julie was only 14. The close and warm relationship they once shared seemed to have vanished. Julie expressed her desire to drop out of school, possibly a cry for attention that she had started seeking on the streets. Her beauty made her the center of attention at every party. In 1982, Julie graduated from high school. Her parents hoped for her to pursue specialized education, so her father, a police officer, helped her get into an engineering college. He appealed to the college director for special admission conditions, emphasizing Julie's Native American heritage. His efforts paid off, and Julie was admitted to the college in the fall of 1983. She had already been leading sexual life in her 18. Julie's brother chose a different path. Despite similar upbringings, he enlisted in the Navy at 16. Around the same time, Julie decided to leave college to seek financial independence.
She soon met Neil Ziegler, who was 6 years her senior. Their relationship quickly blossomed, and they secretly married in November 1985, just a few months before Julia's 18th birthday. Her father, initially unaware of her marriage, later supported it, believing it was better for her than staying with her dependent mother. However, the marriage ended in divorce in 1988. Julie returned to live with her mother, finding a new job but reluctant to contribute to living expenses. Her striking appearance drew attention everywhere, with many mistaking her for a model. Julie gradually began using her beauty to interact with affluent men. Despite outward confidence, she was fragile and desperately sought love, but only found fleeting relationships. It was during one such social gathering that she met her future husband, Tim Nist. After moving out, Julie's mother spent years in therapy and finally overcame her addictions. When Julie and Tim had a daughter, the grandmother eagerly assumed childcare responsibilities, remaining involved even when Julie ran off to Greece with a new lover. After Julie's disappearance became known, her mother described George as truly pitiful. He was unattractive and unpleasant to look at, and seemed to have no control over his behavior. The missing woman's mother recounted an incident where she fell victim to George's aggression during an argument with Julie. George shouted and insulted the woman, grabbing her by the throat and pinning her against a wall, not releasing her until he heard threats of police involvement. Julie attempted to end their relationship and called the police after the attack, leading to George's expulsion from the country. Despite this, she soon went to join him in Greece. She actively defended her lover, even taking the blame for the assault. Julie's mother suspected George's involvement in her daughter's disappearance. Following Julie's disappearance, George continued to play the role of an active helper in the search. Julie's close relatives tried to contact the American embassy in Athens, but faced a language barrier as the Greek police stations handling the investigation had no English-speaking staff. The FBI from the USA joined the investigation at this time. It was revealed that George had Julie's passport the entire time. Initially, he claimed to have found it, but changed his story to theft when he learned of the FBI's involvement. His behavior became increasingly suspicious. He attempted to withdraw money from their joint account, but was unable to do so. On January 23, 1999, the couple was supposed to get married. During this time, news about the missing American woman was broadcast on news channels and radio stations. George angrily called Julie's friend, who had approached the media about the case. He claimed his innocence and even made a public statement in the press, actively giving interviews in an attempt to justify himself. However, 16 days after Julie's disappearance, George was brought in for questioning as the main suspect. George recounted that after moving to Greece, Julie quickly became disillusioned with both the country and him. She increasingly missed her homeland and daughter and wanted to return. George tried to support her, but the situation worsened, deeply troubling him. In her final days, she cried constantly. At one point, George's mother found out about Julie's former husband and daughter in America. She began to despise Julie and openly expressed her dislike to George, urging him to leave the woman with a troubled past. The conflicts between the lovers became more frequent and severe, leading to their eviction from a hotel. Julie wanted to contact her family, but her lover prevented her from calling relatives and even physically abused her. The police learned that George's mother suffered from schizophrenia and often stayed in a hospital due to her issues. George inherited some of these problems. He had an inflated self-esteem and always behaved arrogantly. He could manipulate others, which was noticed by the missing woman's relatives and friends. At the slightest disagreement, he aggressively attacked his lover. Besides Julie's mother, who had suffered from his violence, Julie herself sustained serious hand injuries, but claimed they were accidental, continuing to live with her tyrant. After 4 hours of conversation with the police, George could not stick to the story he had spread in the media and confessed to killing his lover. He claimed it was an accident. Apparently, the lover genuinely regretted what had happened. He even cried during the interrogation. However, his confessions were confusing and full of contradictions. Initially, he claimed Julie had never disappeared, then again admitted his guilt, and then denied his involvement in the incident. On January 8, 1999, the couple set off on their long-awaited trip to Athens. They were driving along a deserted 2-lane highway, enjoying the tranquility and scenery. A calm conversation gradually escalated into a serious conflict. Finally, George decided to stop on a stretch of road where there was no one around. In a fit of rage, he jumped out of the car and attacked his beloved, choking her as tightly as he could. He wanted her to be silent and stop screaming. George told the police that it seemed as if he was watching all this from the outside and lost control of himself. He couldn't stop himself until Julie stopped showing signs of life. The lover claimed that these horrific moments lasted only a few seconds, but investigators knew that strangulation takes at least 3 minutes. Afterwards, George was in a state of shock. He came up with the idea of burning his beloved's body, scattering her ashes in the sea from a cliff, and then jumping after her to reunite with her. George recounted that he attempted suicide by shooting himself with a pneumatic gun, jumping under a truck, and taking an overdose of medication, but all his attempts were unsuccessful. However, he was now at the police station for questioning, indicating that all his thoughts were mere fantasy. In reality, he handled his beloved's body differently. After the murder, George simply threw it in the trunk of his car and drove to the nearest gas station. There, he bought gasoline and returned to the crime scene. George dragged the body away from the road near 2 small lakes, doused it with gasoline, and set it on fire. But due to the rain, the body did not burn completely. At some point, he decided to throw it into the lake, but instead, he stuffed the charred corpse back into the trunk and drove to his grandmother's house. There, he found a large travel bag and decided to pack Julie's body in it. But by this time, it had begun to stiffen, and he could not bend it. Moreover, the head did not fit in the bag, so George decided to simply cut it off. He described how he held her head by the hair and lifted it to his face. He remembered seeing terror in her eyes, but she still remained beautiful, so he kissed her on the lips before packing the body in the bag. Then, he burned the bag and threw it into a swamp, leaving the head behind. Later, George drove to Kavala, where he threw Julia Scully's head into the Aegean Sea. 19 days after Julie's disappearance, her ex-lover and would-be husband helped detectives find the murder site and the remains. Tim and the victim's family were informed by the police that George had confessed to the crime. The victim's ex-husband went to Greece to bring Julie's body back to her homeland. Meanwhile, the criminal recounted what he had done to the woman in a live broadcast. Learning of his misdeed, the murderer's mother suffered a stroke, and his grandmother was shocked. The Greek authorities stated it was one of the most horrific murders they had known at the time. Tim's father declared that the lover should have died along with his beloved. Despite this, numerous articles emerged blaming the victim herself for what happened. The victim's family believed her lover initially used Julie for money as soon as he heard about her wealthy husband. He persuaded her to divorce and win a large settlement in court, which she was supposed to invest in his business. However, before her death, Julie finally realized his true intentions and refused to fund his projects, leading to her becoming a victim. The trial of George Skiadopoulos began on November 27, 1999. In the Greek justice system, trials are conducted by 3 judges simultaneously instead of a jury, significantly speeding up the process. Additionally, there were no defense witnesses present at the hearings. George gave horrific confessions that lasted about 5 hours. His lawyers tried to argue insanity, citing that the criminal's mother suffered from schizophrenia, and he might have inherited mental problems. Meanwhile, the accused himself requested the death penalty, although capital punishment was prohibited in Greece. Eventually, on December 6th, the court unanimously sentenced George Skiadopoulos to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole on all charges. However, the Greek justice system was not perfect. In 2002, George appealed, claiming he was insane at the time of the murder. As a result, his sentence was reduced to 23 years with the right to further appeal. By 2007, the criminal was released and now lives with his new family in Kavala. In the United States, Julie's ex-husband, Tim Nist, became a pillar of support for all her relatives and friends. Despite her betrayal, he proved to be a dignified man who took on the responsibility and organization of Julie's funeral. After the funeral, Tim was given a diary of memories about his ex-wife for their daughter Katie. Written by Julie's friends, the entries tried to portray her life from a bright and kind perspective. When her daughter grows up, she should know that her mother loved her and was a wonderful, beloved woman. Love is a complex emotion that can be a beautiful and constructive force. But recklessness can sometimes cloud judgment and lead to dangerous actions. In most cases, people can realize the reality in time and protect themselves. Unfortunately, Julie's circumstances were different. Her story serves as a reminder that safety and well-being should always be priorities in everyone's life, even in matters of love. Case of Kristen Rossum. She could have been a scientist, but she chose a different path. Blonde Kristen Rossum, a chemistry graduate from San Diego State University, could have had a brilliant future. Instead, she is serving a life sentence in the Central California Women's Facility for the crime against her husband. Ralph and Constance Rossum had 3 children and were preparing them for an undoubtedly bright future. The children received education from top schools, were tutored, and participated in clubs and sections for talent development. However, the fragile and impulsive Kristen broke, unable to keep up with the pace and pursuit of the ideal. Lying, skipping classes, and the desire to escape reality first introduced her to a sense of ease and oblivion after consuming alcohol. But soon, alcohol stopped providing the desired effect of tranquility, and she became dependent on the controlled substance methamphetamine. Methamphetamine, meth, is the most addictive illicit substance in the USA. It causes paranoia, clouds judgment, euphoria, and hallucinations. Kristen's erratic behavior and detachment from real life caught her parents' attention. After a long conversation, she admitted that she had been addicted to the substance since high school. This behavior was a severe blow for a family of university-educated professionals. After several months of numerous conflicts with her parents, 17-year-old Kristen secretly ran away to Mexico with friends for a holiday. There, she met a man by chance. Tall, handsome Gregory de Villiers, 7 years her senior, seemed like an angel who would save her. And he did. Greg fell in love with the bad girl. He took on the role of a parent and responsibility for her well-being. With Greg's support, she managed to get a job at a local forensic department as a toxicology assistant. Her skills impressed the employer. Her addiction was forgotten, which worked in her favor, as her job in toxicology provided access to seized controlled substances. As a forensic assistant, Kristen graduated from university with honors. Her teachers and employer praised her, handing her the Best Student Award, unaware of the reasons for her love of the chosen profession. Her relationship with Greg lasted about 5 years and ended with a grand wedding on June 5, 1999. Kristen's parents adored Greg and were at ease for their daughter, as she had climbed out of the pit of dependency and confidently stood on the road to a promising and happy life. In March 2000, Kristen was hired by the San Diego County Medical Examiner's Office as a toxicologist. A toxicologist analyzes body fluids to detect controlled substances. Gregory was working in the biotechnology industry at the time. Kristen quickly grew bored with her monotonous life and began seeking excitement elsewhere. She found an opportunity with a new colleague, Michael Robertson, who had been appointed as the department head. He was married, but that didn't stop a sudden infatuation between them. They couldn't keep their relationship secret for long. Greg found numerous letters exchanged between the secret lovers. The marital relationship deteriorated, but Gregory still hoped to save the marriage, knowing his wife's weaknesses and trying as hard as ever to save her. This time, Kristen didn't want to be saved. She demanded a divorce. On the morning of Monday, November 6, 2000, Kristen was getting ready for work as usual. Greg was ill and stayed home. Kristen was very worried about her husband. In the days following their separation talk, he had been lethargic and unusually calm. She informed his workplace of her husband's illness. She also visited him during her lunch break. Greg was asleep. At 9:22 p.m. that same day, Christine called emergency services to report that her husband, Greg, was not breathing. He had most likely committed suicide because he was home alone. The woman cried into the phone and did not listen to the dispatcher's instructions to examine the body and possibly administer first aid. Police officers and paramedics arriving on the scene at 10:19 p.m. pronounced Gregory de Villiers dead. He was lying on the bedroom floor with his torso exposed, surrounded by scattered rose petals. The room examination suggested that Greg most likely consumed a lethal dose of several controlled substances. Empty vials of powerful painkillers were scattered around, and torn wedding photos were found on his bed. During the interrogation, Kristen stated that she had informed her husband of their separation the previous evening. Just 17 months after the wedding, she regretted getting married. She felt she had rushed into it, Greg was too clingy, and she wanted to distance herself. Greg's death was ruled a suicide. The cause of death was strong sedative drugs. Kristen signed the cremation papers. However, Gregory's family and friends refused to believe in such a sudden suicide. None of them noticed any changes in his character or mood. He had not shared his marital problems with anyone. Greg was so opposed to controlled substances that he would never have taken them. Soon, the relatives managed to stop the cremation and insisted on an independent autopsy. The family's persistence allowed for the consideration of a homicide scenario. Soon, toxicological tests revealed that Gregory's body contained an extremely high amount of fentanyl, a pain reliever 150 times stronger than morphine, along with lesser amounts of clonazepam and trace amounts of oxycodone, known as hillbilly heroin. Investigators speculated that, under the strong influence of clonazepam and other detected drugs, someone else administered the lethal dose of fentanyl to Gregory. Kristen became the prime suspect, as fentanyl is not an over-the-counter medication, and she had ample knowledge and access to such drugs. Upon arrival for interrogation at the police station, Kristen's emaciated, unattractive appearance and her doping behavior indicated her drug dependency. This was confirmed by her own statements on the day of Gregory's death. Kristen was inconsistent in her accounts. Initially, Kristen told paramedics that Gregory had not taken any medication, but later she changed her statement, suggesting he might have taken oxycodone. At the hospital, Kristen told a nurse that Gregory might have overdosed on oxycodone. Oxycodone is similar in effect to codeine-based drugs. It can not only relieve pain, but also induce a sense of euphoria. It depresses the respiratory center, and without timely assistance, its use can be fatal. The police considered the possibility that Gregory died from an accidental overdose of cold medicine and oxycodone. In conversations with Kristen, they also learned that Gregory was very upset about their failing marriage, leading Kristen to tell the police that he ended his own life. This was another investigative avenue they explored. On November 8th, a colleague of Kristen's, Russ Lowe, called the police. He informed them about Kristen's affair with her boss. This information shifted the course of the police investigation. Evidence of Kristen's connection with her boss, Dr. Robertson, was found. The evidence included passionate emails they exchanged, as well as computer files and professional articles revealing Dr. Robertson's specialized knowledge of fentanyl. The criminal puzzle was coming together perfectly. It was suspected that Gregory became a threat to the lovers, as he knew that Kristen, with her access to the lab and controlled substances, was secretly using them, and Michael was covering for her. It was a premeditated crime. The challenge for the investigators was to prove it. During interrogation, Michael Robertson told detectives that he was aware of his lover's drug dependency. At that time, no charges were brought against the couple. They were both dismissed from their jobs for violating several rules during the investigation. Serious trouble for Kristen began in January when police raided her home, finding traces of drugs and paraphernalia. She was arrested for the first time but was later released on bail. The investigation progressed as new information emerged. This included Kristen's diary. During its initial examination, investigators hypothesized that it was written by Kristen not for herself, but for an external reader, as a means of covering up and affirming her innocence while crafting the appearance of Gregory's perfect self-inflicted demise. On the day of her husband's death, she bought a rose in revealing lingerie actions inconsistent with her distressed demeanor. Medical examination indicated that Gregory was unconscious for at least 6 hours before his passing, and his death could have occurred an hour or an hour and a half before it was confirmed. Additionally, a bruise around a needle injection site on the young man's arm was found, its purpose and executor unexplained. At Kristen's workplace, A shortage of the drug that led to Gregory's demise, as well as other controlled substances, was discovered. Police believed Kristen poisoned Gregory, administering fentanyl without his knowledge. The prosecution built its case on toxicological and medical data. With enough circumstantial evidence, Christine was arrested on June 25, 2001, and charged with first-degree murder. After spending 6 months in custody, she was released on bail. The first trial soon commenced. The prosecution's main theory was the motive for the homicide. They argued that she terminated Gregory because he threatened to tarnish her good girl reputation by revealing her renewed drug use and affair with Michael Robertson. The prosecution claimed Kristen poisoned Gregory with fentanyl. The court heard that fentanyl is a powerful synthetic opioid, 80 times stronger than morphine. It was suggested that she first tried to end his life with clonazepam, but when that failed, she administered fentanyl. They also argued that she then staged the bedroom to look like Gregory ended his own life, tearing pages from her diary and placing rose petals and a wedding photo around his body. The court heard that Kristen, with a degree in biochemistry, used her knowledge of drugs and chemistry to terminate Gregory. The prosecution also claimed that Kristen hoped to convince her colleagues in the medical examiner's office that Gregory's death was self-inflicted, hiding information about the fentanyl. However, before Gregory's autopsy could be conducted, she was transferred to another lab, and the attempt to substitute toxicological research was unsuccessful. The prosecution presented Kristen's day on November 6th. Early in the morning, she called Gregory's employer to report his absence, then went to work. Her colleagues testified that about an hour after she arrived at work, around 9 a.m., she was seen crying in Michael's office. The apartment building manager, where Kristen and Gregory lived, reported seeing her return home at 12:10 p.m. At 12:41 p.m., she went to a local grocery store and purchased several items, including a single red rose. Credit card statements confirm this fact. Hours before Gregory's demise, she made multiple calls to Michael. Dr. Brian Blackburn, the San Diego County medical examiner who conducted Gregory's autopsy, testified that Gregory had been deceased for at least an hour before the paramedics arrived. He informed the court that Gregory developed early bronchopneumonia. This condition arises when secretions, normally expelled through breathing, accumulate in the lungs because a person is either unconscious or not breathing deeply enough. Dr. Blackburn also informed the court that Gregory's bladder contained a significant amount of urine, which would have been very uncomfortable had he been conscious. This led Dr. Blackburn to conclude that Gregory was breathing poorly for approximately 6 to 12 hours before his death. A person in an unconscious state would not be able to sprinkle rose petals over themselves. Dr. Blackburn showed that the level of clonazepam found in Gregory's blood was not at an overdose level and was not lethal. Dr. Theodore Stanley testified on behalf of the prosecution. He demonstrated that fentanyl is a potent and fast-acting pain reliever with a serious side effect that can lead to a person's respiratory arrest. Dr. Stanley stated that the speed at which fentanyl begins to act depends on the method of its administration. The peak effect occurs about 16 hours after applying a transdermal patch, 20 to 30 minutes after oral ingestion, 15 to 20 minutes after intramuscular injection, and within 5 minutes after intravenous injection. Dr. Stanley informed the court that fentanyl is usually not administered orally because the liver destroys about 65% of it, so only 35% enters the bloodstream. When asked to explain how fentanyl entered Gregory's system, neither Dr. Blackburn nor Dr. Stanley could provide a definitive opinion. Dr. Stanley showed that various concentration levels in Gregory's body, along with data indicating that Gregory was unconscious and breathing shallowly for several hours before his death, suggest that fentanyl was likely administered to Gregory multiple times. The prosecution could not confidently tell the jury how Kristen poisoned Gregory, but there were indications that she might have applied fentanyl patches to his arm while he was asleep. The disappearance of 15 patches from the laboratory where Kristen formerly worked supported this theory as a possibility. The defense asserted Kristen's innocence, acknowledging that fentanyl was the cause of Gregory's death, but claimed he self-administered it, intentionally causing his own demise due to despair over family issues. Kristen testified in court, describing waking up on the morning of November 6th to find Gregory distraught. She called his employer at 7:42 a.m. to report his illness and that he wouldn't be coming to work. She told the court she went to work but returned to the apartment to check on Gregory, having lunch with him after noon. Christine's testimony. I asked Gregory why he was so upset that morning. He replied that he wasn't feeling well and had taken some oxycodone and clonazepam. He planned to stay home and sleep. I left for work. Around 2:30 in the afternoon, during my lunch break, I came home to check on Gregory. We had lunch. I then went back to work. I got home around 8 o'clock in the evening. Gregory was lying on the bed. I thought he was asleep. I took a bath. When I came out, I tried to wake him up. He was cold. I called the emergency services. The prosecutor cross-examined Kristen, calling her explanation strange. She admitted to lying in the past and about her drug use. He told the court that fentanyl was the perfect poison because it's hard to detect, which she knew well from her job. Medical testimony, based on autopsy and toxicological findings, proved that Gregory was unconscious for about 8 hours, meaning Kristen couldn't have had lunch with her husband that day. The defense claimed that although Dr. Blackburn showed the clonazepam level in Gregory's blood wasn't lethal, taking oxycodone, an opioid, and clonazepam, a benzodiazepine, together could create a synergistic effect, making them more potent. They suggested Gregory might have unknowingly taken the drugs himself. How fentanyl was administered and why high levels were found in his system remained unexplained. After 8 hours of deliberation, the jury found Kristen guilty of first-degree homicide and special circumstances homicide due to the use of poison. She was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Kristen maintained her innocence and appealed the verdict. The appellate court heard that errors were made by her own defense team. Her lawyers admitted fentanyl caused the death but failed to test autopsy samples for fentanyl metabolites. This test could have determined whether Gregory swallowed fentanyl or if the fentanyl found in the samples was a result of laboratory contamination after his death. If fentanyl had been detected only in the samples and never in Gregory's body, the prosecution's theory that fentanyl caused his death would have been incorrect. The appellate court heard that there was a break in the chain of custody regarding the samples. They were placed in a cardboard box, with each container marked as a sample from Gregory's body, but the containers weren't sealed. They were supposed to be delivered to the sheriff's office for immediate transfer to an external lab, but the person supposed to receive the samples was absent, so the box remained at the medical examiner's office for about 36 hours before being delivered to the sheriff's forensic lab. The appellate court's argument was that anyone with a key to the medical examiner's office building had access to the samples. Fentanyl could have been added to the samples posthumously. Kristen believed there was a motive to tamper with the samples and frame her for the crime due to various personal relationships and tensions among the staff. Indeed, Kristen argued in the appellate court that on November 8, 2000, Michael informed one of the toxicologists that he had examined a sample of Gregory's stomach contents. The 3-judge panel of the 9th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals concluded that Kristen's lawyers erred in not contesting the prosecution's claim that her husband died from a fentanyl overdose. They stated that her legal team should have tested the autopsy samples for fentanyl metabolites, rather than just admitting he died in such a manner. However, they did not overturn the verdict, but sent the case back to federal court to determine if this defense error could have altered the trial's outcome. After this decision, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that federal courts must adhere to the state court's decision when considering such appeals. Based on this ruling, the appellate court voted against holding a hearing on Kristen's case. Her appeal was denied, and she remains in custody. Michael Robertson was implicated as an accomplice in Kristen's trial. Authorities discreetly filed a criminal conspiracy complaint and issued a sealed warrant for the arrest of Michael Robertson, the former boss and lover of convicted perpetrator Kristen Rossum. Robertson, who lives freely and works as a forensic toxicology consultant in Australia since Rossum's husband's demise in 2000, could be arrested and held on $100,000 bail if he ever returns to the United States. Gregory's family filed a lawsuit accusing the county of negligence that allowed Kristen to steal a lethal dose of drugs from the medical examiner's office undetected. In 2006, a U.S. court awarded them $147 million in civil damages. In a case that continues to captivate the nation, Rossum, a former toxicologist at the county medical examiner's office, was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole in February 2003 for stealing drugs from the lab and using them to poison her husband, Gregory de Villers, staging a suicide scene in their apartment, scattering his body with red rose petals. Law enforcement officers are tasked with protecting the legal rights and interests of the citizens of their country, ensuring public order safety, and identifying and stopping any violations. Theoretically, the charter and principles of law enforcement operations sound flawless, but in real life, there are cases that literally make your blood run cold when people, who are meant to serve and protect, violate the law themselves or cover up for those who do. Such wrongful actions often lead to real criminal schemes, resulting in severe consequences. The case of Valeria Vivanco, a police officer who died in the line of duty, gained widespread resonance not only in Chile, where the tragic events unfolded, but also in the media of other countries. Essentially, the young woman's life was ended by a colleague who was supposed to protect her and ensure her safety. The most horrifying aspect was that the higher authorities knew about this and attempted to distort the facts, accusing another person of the incident and hiding the real circumstances of the event. Although the actual culprit of the tragedy was identified and even sentenced to a real prison term, the motive behind his actions remains unclear, whether it was a tragic accident or if it was deliberate. Moreover, it's puzzling why he was covered and defended by high-ranking individuals for so long. Even after it seemed the guilty party had faced punishment, the Supreme Court, upon reviewing an appeal, shocked the victim's family with its unexpected decision. Who was Valeria Vivanco? Valeria Fernanda Vivanco was born on May 29, 1996, in the small commune of La Granja, located near the city of Santiago, the capital of Chile, and was the youngest of 3 children in the simple family of Miguel and Jacqueline Vivanco. She was raised alongside her older biological brother Michelangelo and sister Daniela. The family patriarch worked for a company involved in the transportation of passengers and goods, while her mother was a homemaker dedicated to raising her children and creating a cozy home environment. When Valeria started school, her parents decided to separate. This was a huge shock for the girl, and although the ex-spouses continued to communicate post-divorce, and the father remained actively involved in the lives of his children from his first marriage, including providing financial support, the youngest daughter harbored resentment towards him. They occasionally argued, sometimes not speaking for months, but they always reconciled. Miguel Vivanco remarried soon after, and Valeria gained 2 more half-siblings with whom she, as well as Daniela and Michelangelo, maintained warm family relations. Jacqueline never remarried, raised her children, and later took care of her grandchildren, gifted to her by her older offspring. From an early age, Valeria demonstrated a strong-willed character, determination, and incredible perseverance in all her endeavors. She excelled in school, engaged in sports, was courageous and just, and was always ready to help others, sometimes even at risk to herself. It was likely this desire to assist those around her, protect the vulnerable, and stand up for justice that led her to pursue a career in the police force. After successfully completing high school, Valeria enrolled in the police academy in Santiago. She graduated with honors, becoming an investigator, and having received her diploma in 2016 at the age of 20, joined the Chilean police force the following year. She began her service in the bureau investigating especially serious crimes located in the capital. From the first days of her service, young Valeria proved herself to be a dedicated law enforcement officer and a true fighter for justice. She loved her job, performed her duties diligently, and was ready to rush anywhere at any time if required by her service. She could leave in the middle of the night to respond to a crime scene, chased after criminals, risking herself, and sometimes had to act as a psychologist when interacting with people who had lost loved ones. Colleagues described Vivanco as kind, cheerful, and friendly, yet she was a true professional and a reliable partner. She served in the police force for almost 5.5 years, during which she received a vast number of accolades, awards, and actively advanced in her career, earning the respect of her colleagues and the admiration of the leadership. Additionally, she represented her department in Spain, spending about 2 weeks in Madrid on an official visit. She was immensely proud to be entrusted with such responsible missions. By 2020, she had been promoted to assistant inspector, the new young colleague. In January 2020, a new member was welcomed to the precinct where Valeria worked, 21-year-old Lionel Alejandro Contreras Canales. Fresh out of the police academy, Valeria effectively became his mentor at his first job. A few months later, they became partners and initially got along pretty well. Little is known about Lionel's early years. Some information suggests he came from a rather influential and affluent family, but a high-ranking official as his uncle. Growing up in comfort, never wanting for anything, Lionel was quite self-centered, believing everything should go his way. Valeria quickly caught the eye of her new colleague and partner as he made various attempts to show her attention, tried to court her, and even asked her out a few times, but was met with firm rejection each time. Valeria took her job very seriously, considered workplace romances inappropriate, and was quite strict with the young co-worker, seeing him as immature. The issue wasn't so much the age difference, Lionel was only 3 years younger, as it was his behavior, which Valeria found childish but hoped to help him mature. In July 2020, Valeria and her young partner were involved in apprehending robbers who had stolen money from a store's cash register. The criminals, not having left the scene and armed, initiated a shootout, during which both were fatally engaged by Lionel. Although casualties could have been avoided, Lionel's actions were not deemed excessive for apprehending the individuals. However, this incident strained the relationship between the partners. The last birthday. On May 29, 2021, Valeria celebrated her 25th birthday. The celebration took place at her mother's house, attended by many guests including relatives, friends, and work colleagues. Lionel, however, was not among the invited. Valeria, aiming to avoid potential awkwardness, chose not to invite her young partner, who had recently attempted to court her again. Valeria tried to talk to him about this, but he only repeated his affections for her, which she did not want other colleagues to find out about. Despite the large turnout, gifts, heartfelt congratulations, and warm wishes, the birthday girl seemed upset, though she tried to smile. The reason was a recent argument with her father, leading to days without communication. Valeria hoped her father would attend her birthday, allowing them to reconcile, but the likely angered parent only sent a terse congratulatory message, not even calling. Jacqueline noticed her daughter's distress and knew the reason behind her hidden sadness. Angry at her ex-husband's actions, she believed Miguel would eventually call Valeria, talk things out, and reconcile as they always had before. Unfortunately, the father and daughter never got the chance to talk again, as 2 weeks later, Valeria tragically lost her life while on duty. The fatal shot. On June 13, 2021, Valeria was on night duty, participating in street patrols and vehicle checks. This was not a standard procedure, but a search for suspects related to the crime against a young woman that had occurred the previous day in a suburb of the capital. There was an alert for a white Kia Cerrado, believed to be driven by a suspected criminal. The suspect likely had a weapon and might not have been alone in the car. Valeria was in a patrol car with her partner Lionel, driven by Deputy Commissioner Felipe Gallardo Araya. They spotted the suspect's vehicle and initiated a pursuit without waiting for backup. The officers managed to intercept and block the suspect's escape. Canales and Vivanco exited their vehicle, weapons drawn, and called for the offenders to surrender and exit their car with their hands up. At that moment, a single shot rang out, and as everyone tried to understand who fired and where, Valeria, clutching her side, fell to the asphalt next to the police car. Reinforcements arrived just then, so her colleagues heard the shot and saw that she was wounded, but couldn't fully grasp what had happened and who had fired. The criminals? seizing the moment of confusion, accelerated and fled the scene while the injured officer was being administered first aid. Despite the rapid arrival of medics and her colleagues' efforts to stem the bleeding, Valeria could not be saved. She was rushed to the nearest hospital, where top specialists fought for her life for several hours. However, due to severe blood loss and damage to vital organs, she passed away on the operating table without regaining consciousness. When her family was informed, her parents, brothers, and sisters immediately rushed to the hospital, but by then, the wounded officer had already died. Miguel was not just stricken with grief, but utterly devastated, as he had not had the chance to speak and reconcile with his beloved daughter, with whom he had had a petty argument last. He felt a profound sense of guilt toward her, so shaken by the event that he himself required medical attention to prevent a heart attack. The search and arrest of the suspects. According to the official version, Vivanco died in the line of duty during an operation to catch dangerous criminals. She was hailed as a hero who gave her life for the peace and safety of others. This incident was widely covered in local media, with reporters vividly describing the young officer's heroism and self-sacrifice. The investigation was handled by specialists from the Homicide and Major Crimes Division, where Valeria herself had worked. They concluded that she died from a shot to the abdomen, fired by someone facing her from the direction of the suspect's vehicle she was pursuing with her colleagues. Everything seemed logical, with witnesses corroborating the story, making it appear that the case was solved and all that remained was to find and punish the culprits who were still at large and possibly on the run. Soon after, the suspects were apprehended, generating widespread public attention. The criminals turned out to be 19-year-old Miguel Alejandro Cañupan and his 17-year-old accomplice, whose name was withheld due to his minor status, both previously convicted for minor offenses. The then president of Chile, Miguel Juan Sebastián Piñera Echenique, issued an official statement promising that the perpetrators would be brought to justice with all the rigor of the law. Something doesn't add up. After the autopsy and all necessary examinations were conducted, the body of the deceased Vivanco was handed over to her family and was buried with honors at one of the capital's cemeteries. Hundreds of people came to pay their last respects, expressing their sincere condolences to the girl's family. According to Jacqueline and Miguel, the entire ordeal seemed like a horrific dream, and they hardly remembered the events of the funeral day. Among the men carrying Valeria's coffin was her colleague Lionel, who appeared to mourn her more than anyone else. However, according to other colleagues, there had been some tension between the partners lately, to the extent that the girl didn't even invite the young man to her birthday celebration. Almost immediately after the funeral, court proceedings began regarding the suspects who were apprehended the day after the incident and were in custody. At that moment, everyone was confident that the culprits were caught, and proving their guilt seemed straightforward, especially since they began to give confessional testimonies. However, it soon became clear that the investigation had been flawed from the start, with critical details overlooked and key findings from forensic experts downplayed. The process was mishandled, and high-ranking officials tried to conceal the identity of the true culprit behind the girl's demise. Thus, about a month and a half after the officer's death, the case took an unexpected turn. By the end of July, 2 employees were suspended from their duties, allegedly involved in the incident leading to Valeria's death. On August 1st, the deceased girl's parents were called to the capital's prosecutor's office for a meeting on an important matter. The parents thought that new evidence had emerged in their daughter's case and that the detainees, awaiting their final sentence, would finally receive deserved punishment. However, the grief-stricken Jacqueline and Miguel were shocked to learn that their daughter died from a bullet fired by her colleague. This was personally communicated to them by prosecutor Juan Carlos Carrasco, who also conveyed his condolences and apologies on behalf of the entire investigative department. Valeria's parents were bewildered. They couldn't believe their ears and couldn't understand how such a thing could happen. They relived their grief anew and wanted clarification on the situation and why this information only became known so much later. As it turned out, that single fatal shot came from the service weapon in the hands of one of the girl's colleagues. This was confirmed by a ballistics examination conducted that same day, but its results were somehow distorted, and the bullet extracted from the body was sent to the evidence locker with entirely different characteristics: shape, caliber, weight, etc. Furthermore, the bullet had exited through and through, and it was not extracted from the body. The entry and exit wounds in the forensic reports were accidentally or intentionally confused. That is, the bullet did not enter through the abdomen and exit through the back, but quite the opposite. The shot was fired at her back. Some pages from the autopsy report were missing, while others were clearly altered and replaced. Additionally, the detainees, over whom the trial was proceeding and who supposedly confessed to their guilt and were about to be imprisoned, started filing complaints. They claimed that their confessions were coerced through torture and threats, and the pistol they had on them that evening wasn't even loaded. Moreover, their involvement in the earlier crime, which prompted the interception plan that fateful night, was also unconfirmed. New suspects. In a twist, Vivanco went from being seen as a tragic hero who died in the line of duty to a victim of betrayal, killed by her own colleagues. Given the new circumstances, the primary suspects became Felipe Giliardo Araya, who was driving the police car, and Valeria's partner, Lionel Alejandro Contreras Canales, who was seated in the back. Both suspects were immediately suspended from duty. Thus, on August 5th, it became known that the bullet that killed Valeria was fired from a service weapon. Subsequently, a document emerged with the results of the examination, indicating that only Canales had gunshot residue on his hands, making him the prime suspect. Notably, this finding had not been mentioned anywhere before, as if it never existed. Several other reports concerning the ballistics examination and the pathologist's conclusions were improperly filed and ended up in an archive box, which was never adequately checked. Whether this was an accident, criminal negligence, or intentional concealment of crucial facts was yet to be determined. Now the police officers who participated in the operation to apprehend the criminals themselves became suspects in the murder of their colleague. They, along with the previously arrested perpetrators, took part in a reenactment of the events of that night. Philippe claimed that from the driver's seat he could only see Valeria, who was seated next to him in the front passenger seat and was the first to exit the car. Lionel was sitting behind and also exited the vehicle, but his actions could not be seen by the driver. Valeria had only taken a few steps when a shot was fired. She fell, and the suspect's car they were chasing sped away. Lionel then rushed to the injured woman to provide first aid. Lionel claimed that he and his partner exited the patrol car almost simultaneously, but she immediately rushed forward when the shot was fired. He insisted that he did not shoot his colleague, and the driver should have seen and confirmed this. He also confirmed that he was the first to rush to Valeria's aid and tried to compress her wound. Despite differences in the direct participants' testimonies, the reconstruction showed that Canales was behind his partner at the moment of the shot, and the bullet's trajectory matched his location. He was also the only person found with gunshot residue on his hands. Possible motives for the crime. After previously hidden reports and examination results were released, Lionel was taken into custody as the primary suspect, while the young men previously detained were released under a non-exit agreement, as there was effectively nothing to charge them with. However, the motive behind the young officers' actions remained unclear. The first and main theory was that the entire incident was a tragic accident. Supposedly, the young and inexperienced officer discharged his weapon unintentionally while standing behind his partner. He panicked, tried to help her, and when turning in his service weapon that day, insisted he hadn't fired it. However, the truth quickly surfaced, and influential relatives of the young man, using all their power, money, and connections, attempted to suppress the incident. Hence the cleaned reports, missing documents, confusion in the evidence, and coerced testimonies from the detained. Another theory, partially confirmed by Lionel himself, was that he was unrequitedly in love with Valeria and desperately sought her attention, but all his efforts were in vain. Over time, he began to merely irritate the girl, who didn't even invite him to her birthday party attended by the entire department. The shot in the back was his revenge for the rejection. A third theory, proposed by the deceased's relatives, suggested that Valeria discovered something she wasn't supposed to know, some corruption scheme, official crimes, or something similar. As an honest and fair person, she would undoubtedly have exposed the culprits, which is why she was eliminated, and young Lionel was chosen as the executor, promised that he would remain above suspicion. The second suspect. Despite Canales being taken into custody, suspicions about Philippe were not entirely dispelled. He was armed with identical service weapons, also stood behind the deceased colleague, and could have fired the shot. Moreover, he had previously been disciplined for the unjustified use of a weapon during a criminal arrest, though no one was harmed in that instance. Araya had since been nicknamed the Reckless Shooter. The defense team hired by the relatives to defend Lionel immediately seized this theory, insisting that Philippe accidentally shot the colleague, and since the service weapons were identical, the pistols could have been mixed up or intentionally swapped. Additionally, the man was inconsistent in his testimony, changing it several times, and later he claimed he could not accurately describe the events of that night, as everything happened very quickly. However, no gunpowder residue was found on the driver's hands, indicating his innocence. In response, Canales claimed that gunpowder got on his hands when he was compressing the wound on the victim's body, and Araya, who also helped the woman, might have washed his hands before the examination. Yet this statement was not credible, as Valeria's bloodstains remained on Philippe's hands, and it's impossible to wash off gunpowder without removing blood. The trial and verdict. The quality of the investigative team's work was once again questioned, and the deceased girl's parents despaired, unsure how to achieve justice. Furthermore, the new turn in the case caused public outrage and led to mistrust in the law enforcement agencies. This story was now covered not only by Chilean but also international media. As a result, many high-ranking officials were suspended from work and soon lost their positions, particularly the head of the Homicide Investigation Department. After additional investigation, Lionel remained the only suspect, with all others excluded from the list and classified as witnesses. In the spring of 2022, he was officially dismissed and remained in custody until the trial's conclusion. The hearings for this case only began in March of the following year, and based on the evidence and witness testimony, the suspect's guilt was fully proven. Initially, the prosecution accused Canales of intentionally murdering his partner and sought the maximum sentence for such cases. However, the accused insisted he would never harm Valeria, as he loved her. Nonetheless, it was from his pistol that the bullet was fired, ending the girl's life. Lionel was found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 12 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 8 years. Following the announcement of the final verdict, the Vivanco family expressed their disagreement, considering the sentence too lenient, while the defendant and his legal team immediately filed a series of appeals. However, the real shock came to Valeria's relatives in February 2024, when the Supreme Court unexpectedly overturned the previously assigned punishment, sentencing the perpetrator to only 540 days of imprisonment, counted from the day of his arrest. Effectively, he walked free from the courtroom. The detective Valeria Vivanco's family, in light of this event, plans to sue the Chilean state, accusing the judges of corruption. In an official statement, the deceased girl's mother said, "The 12-year sentence already seemed too lenient to us, but this is just mockery. I feel as if my daughter has died all over again. I no longer believe in justice. Our family plans to sue the negligent Chilean state, as that's exactly what it deserves." Today we're heading to San Antonio, Texas, a city near the Mexican border that stands out for its incredible cultural diversity and tradition blending. This border location plays a crucial role, offering a slice of home for Mexicans. The name San Antonio itself, derived from Mexico's national language, Spanish translates to Saint Anthony, which is quite fitting for the city. A highlight of San Antonio is the Trinity University College of Arts and Sciences, particularly the Murchison Tower. Standing at 166 feet, it was once the tallest structure in the city. One day, a young man walked into the university campus. He made his way to a women's dormitory on the second floor, found a specific room, and forcibly entered by breaking the door handle, wreaking havoc inside. With furious anger, he scattered clothes around the room, broke furniture, and tore apart books and notebooks on the desk. His rage was uncontrollable, and by the time security arrived due to the noise, he was sitting on the bed crying, a spilled soda in his hand. The young man was arrested and taken to the police station. The damage inflicted on the room and the university was assessed at $1,650. The individual apprehended was 22-year-old Mark Howerton. Recently, he had lost his beloved girlfriend Kaylee and was struggling to cope with his loss. He went to her room and couldn't manage his emotions. During his arrest, he cried incessantly, repeatedly calling out Kaylee's name. 4 months prior to this incident, Mark Howerton was charged in connection with the demise of his girlfriend and Trinity University cheerleader, Kaylee Mandadi. This story is riddled with rumors, questions, and an abundance of information from law enforcement agencies. But let's take it from the top. Kaylee Anita Mandadi was born on August 26, 1998, in Webster, to Tilak Mandadi and Allison Steele. The family was well off. Allison was a scientist, and Tilak worked as an international executive director at MGM Resorts. After her parents divorced, Allison remarried NASA engineer Lawrence Butlin, who lived in Houston, when Kaylee was 9. Despite her parents' separation, Kaylee maintained a strong relationship with her father, regularly communicating with him. Her stepfather also adored Kaylee and became a second dad to her. Kaylee was not just a grateful and loving daughter and granddaughter, but also an excellent student, team member, sister, and friend whose infectious laughter and kind heart could light up any rooms. In school, Kaylee excelled academically and participated in all extracurricular activities. She enjoyed horseback riding, played the piano, and even performed in theater. Kaylee was a Girl Scout, ran around the Clear Lake neighborhood with her friends, and went on hikes with her parents. In 2016, she graduated with honors from Clear Creek High School in League City, Texas. Kaylee loved animals and joyfully participated in a volunteer group called Animal Therapy. She was always eager to explore new and uncharted territories, dreamed of trying extreme sports, and was constantly in search of thrilling experiences. At 19, the slender, dark-haired Kaylee was already a sophomore at Trinity University in San Antonio, where she was studying communications. She was well-liked with many friends and led the football team's cheerleading squad. Her vibrant and radiant beauty attracted many admirers. One day during a football game where she was cheering for the Trinity team, she met 22-year-old Mark Howerton. The tall, bright athlete and professional baseball player failed to catch Kaylee's eye at first, since she was smitten with Jet and paid no attention to anyone else. But Mark fell for her at first sight, captivated by her large black eyes and the charisma that set her apart from the rest of the cheer squad. Their first meeting didn't go well, nor did their second. However, Mark persisted, and by September 2017, they officially started dating. From the beginning, their friends and acquaintances deemed them an ill-matched pair, as both were too emotional and quick-tempered. Their relationship lacked compromise, marked from the start by tumultuous arguments and confrontations. The young, passionate couple was constantly jealous and quarreled often. Friends who observed their relationship reported that Kaylee frequently had bruises on her arms and legs. A close friend also shared about an incident that deeply frightened her. Kaylee once asked her to retrieve her mobile phone from Mark because she was too scared to do it herself. The situation escalated to the point where Mark became aggressive, brandishing a gun and threatening violence. Kaylee was aware of her boyfriend's jealousy and temper, but always reassured her friends and asked them not to publicize their loud arguments, since she admitted she wasn't entirely innocent either. However, around 1 a.m. on September 24, 2017, Kaylee's roommates couldn't stand it anymore and called the police. They heard loud noises coming from Kaylee's room and a man yelling and threatening violence. The responding officer found Mark alone in the room. Kaylee declined to press charges, stating nothing had happened and it was just a lover's quarrel. But her friends believed Mark was using controlled substances, leading to uncontrollable outbursts of anger. He once threatened to throw Kaylee off a balcony. Her friends reported this to the police as well. Their relationship was like an ocean. During a storm, the waves were tumultuous, but in calm weather, they were blissfully in love. On October 29th, Mark and Kaylee went to the Malaluna Music Festival in San Antonio. It's one of the largest music festivals focusing on gothic, modern industrial, and dark wave music, attracting over 10,000 people annually. Malaluna is a hotspot for partygoers and those seeking solitude, as it's easy to blend into the crowd and disappear within its bounds. Mark and Kaylee had a great time partying with their friends throughout the evening. However, the unexpected arrival of Kaylee's ex once again drove Mark to the edge. They had a major argument and left the festival early. That was the last time their friends saw them that night. 6 hours later, deep into the night, Mark's black Mercedes pulled up at a hospital. He rushed out of the car, desperately waving and calling for help. The medical staff found a semi-nude girl in the front seat, unconscious. The car was in disarray, Kaylee's clothes were scattered about, and she sat slumped forward like a lifeless doll. Kaylee was moved onto a stretcher and taken to the emergency room. Mark informed the hospital staff that they had consumed illegal substances prior to attending the festival. This information aided doctors in treating her for a potential overdose. She was then transferred to another medical facility in Kyle, Texas, where a nurse specialized in intimate assault cases examined her and discovered additional bruises on her arms, legs, and ear. A forensic examination determined that blunt force trauma to the face and head was the cause of demise, indicating Kaylee had been the victim of a fatal assault. Consequently, police initiated an investigation to find the individual responsible for Kaylee Mandadi's loss of life. Mark was the primary suspect since he was the last person seen with Kaylee that night, yet there were no concrete pieces of evidence linking him to the crime. However, Mark cast suspicion on himself. With each subsequent police interview, he altered his account of events, drawing investigators' attention. Surveillance footage captured him and Kaylee in locations Mark had failed to mention. Furthermore, conversations with Kaylee's friends and family members revealed his tendency towards aggressive behavior towards her. One of her sisters even expressed being terrified of him. The police uncovered alleged incidents of violence between the couple, including Mark hitting Kaylee's head against a car window and trashing her dorm room at Trinity. Upon learning about Mark's previous assaults on Kaylee at the university, her parents were devastated. The mother of the slain Trinity University cheerleader, Kaylee Mandadi, filed a lawsuit against the institution, alleging it failed to take necessary steps to protect her daughter from her boyfriend's attacks, who is accused of causing her demise in a fit of jealousy. The lawsuit was filed in the Bexar County District Court on behalf of the mother, Allison Steele. The former boyfriend of her daughter, Mark Howerton, is also named as a defendant. The suit claims that Howerton assaulted the 19-year-old from League City and was ultimately responsible for her fatality. According to the lawsuit, Trinity staff, its administration, and campus police were aware of Mark Howerton's erratic behavior during their relationship. It alleges that the man threatened to break Kaylee Mandadi's face or inflict serious bodily harm. But the university took no action in the weeks leading up to her demise to protect the young woman. A spokesperson for Trinity University declined to comment on the lawsuit's allegations, citing the ongoing legal process. Trinity University's failure to respond to numerous reports of harassment, cruel treatment, intimidation, domestic violence, and gender discrimination led to the tragic end of the sophomore. Allison Steele's statement also mentioned that Kaylee Mandadi's tragedy could have been prevented had Trinity intervened as it should have. The university ignored its own policy on investigating and responding to potential cases of violence and harassment in relationships, as stated in the lawsuit. After an incident in the dorm room, Mark was issued a criminal trespass order, banning him from the campus for a year, yet he repeatedly violated it. Additionally, detectives discovered many stories of Mark's violent behavior towards Kaylee during their relationship. For instance, one of her sisters recounted that he threatened to throw her off a balcony during an argument, while another claimed he also threatened to shoot some of her ex-boyfriend's brothers with his gun. Based on all these statements against him, the police were able to issue a warrant for his arrest, after which he turned himself in. In February 2018, following the discovery of Kaylee's room in disarray at the university, Mark Howerton surrendered to the police. He faced multiple charges including criminal acts, intimate violence, and abduction. However, he pleaded not guilty to these charges. The first trial regarding Kaylee Mandadi's demise began in December 2019. Prosecutors argued that Mark, known for his volatile temperament, fatally assaulted Kaylee Mandadi in a fit of rage. They also claimed that he transported her for nearly 6 hours before taking her to the hospital. In defense, Mark's legal team contended that Kaylee's end could be attributed to various factors. Autopsy reports revealed the presence of banned substances in her system, suggesting a potential spike in blood pressure or head trauma during intimate activity. Kaylee's mother recounted that the injuries and bruises on her daughter's body were severe, akin to falling from an airplane. Indeed, the injuries were extensive. Photos presented to the jurors of Bexar County showed the Trinity University sophomore from San Antonio, Texas, barely recognizable with bruises from head to toe, red marks and scratches. Both of her eyelids were swollen and bruised. The only areas without any sign of injury were her back and the back of her legs. Graphics and photographs taken by Dr. Susanna Dana, the forensic pathologist who conducted Kaylee Mandadi's autopsy, showed a subdural hematoma, a collection of blood usually associated with traumatic brain injury on the right side of her brain. Kaylee's father, Tilak Mandadi, after seeing 2 photos where the victim was in the ICU in a vegetative state, surrounded by numerous tubes with her face hardly visible, spoke about his daughter with a trembling voice as tears filled his eyes. "That's my daughter," he said, "my only child." Dr. Susanna Dana stated that upon examining Mandadi's head, she found a dent in her skull. Most of the doctor's testimonies focused on the cranial and facial injuries Mandadi suffered, which Dana described as severe injuries. These injuries included eye trauma. Both eyelids were bruised, with the left eyelid so swollen it couldn't fully close. There were extensive bruises on both the left and right jaws, bruises on the inside of the mouth, above the teeth on the gums, on the lips and cheeks. There were hemorrhages in both eyes, she said, showing photos of the inner eyelid lining. She concluded that the cause of Mandadi's demise was a blunt object's head and facial trauma. Dr. William Anderson reviewed the autopsy results and disagreed with the conclusions that Kaylee Mandadi had been attacked. "We don't see any fractures in the orbit. No fractures in the nose either. We don't see any fractures on the face. This indicates that there was no frontal assault. Instead, Anderson suggested that the young woman's injuries were more consistent with a fall and extensive medical intervention." Defense attorney John Hunter presented an alternative narrative, stating that the prosecution lacked sufficient evidence to clarify what happened to Kaylee Mandadi that night. Proving Mark Howerton's involvement in the incident was deemed impossible. Throughout the trial, he frequently pointed to Kaylee Mandadi's drug use, at one point referencing her treatment for substance dependence at a hospital. Jason Wallach, a a professor at the University of Sciences in Philadelphia, testified that Kaylee Mandadi had a high level of MDMA, commonly known as ecstasy or Molly, in her blood after her boyfriend took her to the hospital on the evening of October 29, 2017. The presence of these substances indicated that a person could sustain a minor head injury, and the effects of MDMA could turn it fatal. John Hunter, building on the above conclusions, suggested that the drug affects each person differently. Many people experience an increase in body temperature or an electrolyte imbalance when taking the substance. According to him, these conditions could lead to a loss of consciousness. The jury began to hear testimonies. That day, jurors saw a video and heard an audio recording from police officers, where Mark Howerton told investigators that he and Kaylee had an argument and engaged in intimate relations in the car before she passed out, and that they enjoyed engaging in rough intimacy. He stated he would strangle her during the act because she liked it. Mark Howerton claimed that everything was consensual, but where did these bruises come from and when? This question remained unresolved during the trial concerning Kaylee's demise in December 2019. Allison firmly believed that Mark Howerton would be held responsible for her daughter's end. However, after the 2019 trial, the family felt deeply disappointed. Although Mark was charged with ending a life, he maintained his innocence. The defense argued that the victim's injuries were inflicted during resuscitation efforts by hospital staff. As a result, the jury could not reach a verdict, leading to a mistrial. The case was heard in the 144th District Court of the state, presided over by Judge Raymond Angelini. When the jury could not reach a verdict, the case was declared a mistrial and dismissed. Thus, in the first trial, Howerton was acquitted of the charges, leaving the case unresolved. Bexar County District Attorney Joe Gonzalez, who had been handling the case from the beginning, expressed his disappointment with the outcome and stated that he would review the case. During this time, Kaylee Mandadi's parents decided to start their investigation. They collected all evidence and autopsy reports from the police and focused on a small, round, pinpoint bruise near Kaylee's ear. Allison and Lawrence speculated that Mark might have hit her head against the car window, causing her to hit the door lock and get bruised. They hoped this would establish his guilt. Identifying a similar Mercedes, the car Mark was driving that night, Lawrence took photos, posing in a manner they believed reflected the circumstances under which Kaylee might have injured her head. With the assistance of Texas Rangers, they obtained records, 3 written affidavits under oath, in the warrant for Howerton's arrest on charges of criminal acts, aggravated intimate assault and criminal mischief, addressing many questions about Mandadi's case and providing a detailed timeline of events before and after her demise. The slideshow listed key moments in chronological order leading to Kaylee's death and the evidence found during the investigation. Specifically, the timeline provided by authorities sheds light on Mark Howerton's alleged falsehoods to the Rangers and the evidence that led to his arrest. Throughout the trial, prosecutors portrayed Howerton as a manipulative and controlling boyfriend who constantly called Kaylee and took her phone away so she couldn't talk to friends. At one point, 2 weeks before her demise, Howerton pushed Mandadi against a brick wall and in a fit of rage trashed her dorm room. Soon after, Kaylee told Mark that she needed space, according to texts reviewed by the jury. Howerton began sending her dozens of messages, at one point threatening to end his life. She pleaded with him not to do so. In total, he called her about 200 times that evening. Then, they attended a festival and argued over Kaylee's ex-boyfriend, who was also there. Mark Howerton took Kaylee Mandadi from the festival, placed her in the car, and drove to a deserted parking lot near the Whataburger headquarters, close to US 281 and Sunset Road. GPS camera records show that the couple was in the parking lot for over an hour. Prosecutors suggested that it was there Mark Howerton attacked Kaylee Mandadi and beat her to death. Kaylee Mandadi's family thanked the Texas Rangers for their diligent work in bringing the appropriate criminal charges against Kaylee's alleged assailant. The retrial for Mark Howerton commenced in June 2023 after delays due to the COVID-19 pandemic. At the trial, the prosecution considered presenting a video recorded by Kaylee Mandadi's parents, capturing her injuries in the hospital, but ultimately withdrew it due to potential complications and new disputes. Evidence collected with the help of Texas Rangers was also taken into account. Mark Howerton was found guilty of aggravated assault causing bodily harm, leading to legal case. The court sentenced him to 20 years in prison, with a $10,000 fine and restitution to Kaylee Mandadi's family. Additionally, he was barred from contacting over 20 individuals involved in the case. Mark, now over 30 years old, is serving his sentence in the Willacy County Jail, eligible for parole in 2033. The conviction brought some closure to Kaylee's family, though they stated the sentence seemed insufficient for their loss. In the second trial, Mark Howerton faced charges including aggravated assault, causing serious bodily harm, in addition to the initial charge of manslaughter from the first trial. Unlike the first trial, the prosecution expanded the charges to include aggravated assault and criminally negligent homicide. The legal strategy was adjusted to present a more comprehensive case against Mark Howerton. However, dissatisfied with the outcome, Kaylee's family and prosecutors insisted on a retrial. Kaylee Mandadi's tragic story highlighted the devastating impact of violence on a young life and her grieving family's quest for justice. This complex case is the focus of the article The Final Hours of Kaylee Mandadi, reported by 48 Hours correspondent Peter Van Sant. Kaylee Mandadi's story serves as a stark reminder of the consequences of violence against young people with promising futures. Despite the conviction, Kaylee's family stated that the verdict does not serve justice for their beloved daughter. In 2019, Allison Steele, Kaylee Mandadi's mother, successfully lobbied the Texas legislature to expand the missing persons alert system in Texas. She then founded the nonprofit organization Kaylee's Calling, aiming to consolidate missing persons alert systems. Steele also established a nonprofit dedicated to providing public information about the Clear Alert, an emergency broadcasting alert in Texas for individuals aged 18 to 64. In addition to these efforts, in 2021, she filed a civil lawsuit against Trinity University alleging negligence in protecting her daughter. Steele claimed that none of Kaylee's guardians were informed that Mark Howerton had trashed her dorm room. She also stated that the university took no action against him, allegedly giving him continuous access to her daughter and making her vulnerable to manipulation. It remains unclear whether the evidence collected by Allison and Lawrence was presented at Mark Howerton's trial in 2023. Despite being acquitted of the charge of ending a life, he was found guilty of aggravated assault causing bodily harm. Prosecutors noted that the family expressed satisfaction with the verdict, as they had endured prolonged suffering and felt relief that the legal proceedings had concluded, allowing them to begin the healing process. Losing a child is an agonizing ordeal, and sadly, it was a heart-wrenching journey that Kaylee Mandadi's parents had to endure. Allison Steele said they are still completely devastated by the loss of Kaylee and asked those of faith to pray for her family, friends, and for justice in this matter.
Is Ryan Whitmer guilty? Ryan Whitmer, a young athlete, is convicted of a horrific crime. He is serving a life sentence with parole eligibility only in 2025. More than 10 years after this tragic event, he is fighting to have his conviction overturned. Ryan's case attracts public attention and excites the population of 3 neighboring states, causing controversy about his guilt. The unusual manner of Sarah Whitmer's death and the fact that a clear motive for the crime has never been revealed is what makes this case so controversial. Sarah and Ryan met at a local cafe they both liked to visit. Ryan ordered a cup of coffee, and Sarah, who was standing in line, noticed a book on his table that she had recently read. Their shared interest in literature was the start of a conversation. They spent several hours discussing books, movies, music, and their shared interests. They learned that they both loved nature, traveling, and animals. With each meeting, their relationship grew closer and more trusting.
They learned more and more about each other, and gradually their friendship grew into true love. After a few months of their relationship, Ryan proposed to Sarah during a romantic dinner at the very same cafe. Sarah was happy, and naturally, she said yes. The young lovers set a wedding date. They looked out for a beautiful 2-story house in Hamilton. On April 10th, 2008, their wedding took place. The wedding ceremony was held in a small and cozy church, surrounded by their closest friends and family. Everything down to the smallest detail was brought to life by Sarah. Sarah was simply gorgeous in her white dress. Ryan couldn't take his eyes off her. After the festive banquet, under the applause and joyful shouts of the guests, they went on their honeymoon to the Hawaiian Islands, where they spent 2 weeks enjoying each other and the paradise nature. The young people were in love. They made plans for the future and dreamed of children. A fateful coincidence changed their plans. On Monday, August 11th, 2008, after finishing her shift at the dental clinic, Sarah met Ryan at her favorite cafe. They had dinner and had a lively discussion. Afterward, they walked home. Sarah sorted out the groceries she had bought and sat down on the couch. Ryan brought her a glass of water and a pill, for his wife had complained of a headache at dinner. He ran her a bath. Together, they finished watching their favorite TV show and exchanging air kisses. Sarah went upstairs to the bedroom. She undressed, folded her clothes neatly, prepared a towel. She lit the scented candles and turned on her favorite music. Ryan pushed buttons on the TV remote, stopped a couple of times at the soccer game, lied on the couch for no more than 10 minutes, called out to his wife. Over the quiet tune, Sarah didn't hear him. Slowly making his way up to the second floor in the bedroom, Ryan turned on the TV, called out to Sarah again. Silence. In a slight panic, the man made his way to the bathroom. Sarah was lying face down in the tub. Ryan pulled the plug of the tub and rushed to the phone. At 10:49 p.m., emergency services recorded the call. A man yelled into the phone that his wife had drowned in the bathtub. She had probably fallen asleep. In his panic, he didn't listen to the dispatcher's commands and wasted precious time to rescue Sarah. Throughout the call, Ryan, under the careful guidance of the dispatcher, did get Sarah out of the tub and repeatedly performed CPR on her. An ambulance along with police officers showed up at the Whitmer home 6 minutes after the call. An initial inspection of the scene of the tragedy attracted police officers. The bathroom was dry and clean. There were no signs of water or scattered supplies that would suggest an emergency removal of a body from the water. The bathroom was neatly cleaned. Sarah was lying on the bedroom floor with no clothes on, her skin dry. Only the young woman's wet hair communicated drowning. The bedroom was tidy as well, leaving law enforcement to think of a murder. Ryan was thrashing around the bedroom. He was wearing only his underwear. Cardiopulmonary resuscitation was initiated by a medical professional when he found no pulse. A pinkish-white discharge was coming out of Sarah's nose and mouth, indicating drowning. 2 attempts were made to intubate Sarah as she lay on the bedroom floor, but both attempts were unsuccessful. Afterward, Sarah was rushed to an ambulance and 2 more attempts were made to get her heart back into rhythm with a defibrillator, but again, without success. All the while, Ryan remained by his wife's side. Subsequently, medical staff described his condition as extremely upset and anxious. Within 20 minutes of arriving at the hospital, Sarah was attempted to be brought back to life, but at 11:41 p.m., an emergency physician pronounced her dead. Ryan fell to his knees in the hospital hallway and cried. Relatives and friends of the couple could not have imagined that only 4 months after the wedding, a tragedy would occur that would shock the whole city, and Ryan would become the only suspect in the murder of his young and beloved wife. Ryan's first statement, which he gave in the hospital, made the investigation doubt their veracity. He claimed it was just the 2 of them at home with his wife, nothing out of the ordinary. They had dinner at a cafe. They came home. They watched a TV program. Sarah had a headache and he gave her some painkillers, took her to the bathroom. When he found her, Sarah was lying face up. However, the emergency call record reported that the victim was lying face down. The man was dumbfounded by what had happened. He kept repeating the same thing over and over like he was mesmerized.
calling out for Sarah. Under pressure from the investigator, Ryan was forced from victim to participant in the investigation to find out what happened to Sarah that night. He consented to a search of the house. Analysis of the medication Sarah took confirmed it was a common analgesic, but the headaches, the migraines, were a frequent occurrence. So often that she took a course of drugs that changed the hormonal background and plunged her into uncontrollable sleep. This became the first version of Sarah's death. After searches of the house, traces of blood were found on the carpet. It was also recorded during the investigation that at the time the police and emergency services arrived, the bathtub was dry and there were no wet towels. The tile was also dry and clean, leading police to believe that Sarah had been murdered. No wet items, clothing, or other paraphernalia were found in the house with which to soak up the water. Ryan's statements during the 911 call and at the hospital became completely contradictory, which aggravated the case and turned Ryan from a victim into a suspect. The examination of Sarah's body showed that she had bruises on the right side of her forehead and a spot hemorrhage on the inner surface of her eyelid, a bruise on the left side of her neck, a contusion on the back of her neck, an abrasion on her left armpit, and bruises and lacerations on her upper lip. However, this theory did not become strong enough, for Sarah's fingernails were not broken or chipped. There were no marks on her hands, elbows, or knees to prove a struggle. No injuries or marks were found on Ryan's body either. An investigative experiment conducted by Sheriff Bishop did not clearly answer whether there was a struggle between the couple that evening. After all, the bathroom supplies were in place, and there were no other signs of resistance. It was left to speculation. Either Sarah did not take a bath at all, or she did not resist and allowed her husband to drown herself. Sarah's autopsy, which was conducted by Dr. Russell Apt Grove, confirmed that death was caused by drowning. Along with this, multiple muscle hemorrhages in the front of the neck and multiple contusions to the scalp were noted. These injuries were determined to have occurred prior to the woman's death. But how and where were they sustained? The investigation went around in circles with no answers. Toxicology tests showed no illicit or alcoholic substances in Sarah's blood. On August 13, 2008, Ryan was arrested on suspicion of aggravated murder of his wife. The charge was based on an emergency call, a scene that did not match reality and injuries on Sarah's body. This was enough to charge him with drowning his wife. Ryan and Sarah were very much in love with each other. As confirmed by friends and neighbors, they never argued or fought in public. They made plans for their lives. What was the secret that caused their tragic deaths? In March 2009, the first court hearing began. Emergency dispatcher Ron Cronenberger, who took the call, is presented as a witness. He described the conversation with Ryan as nonchalantly calm. He also made several statements about Ryan's actions during the call, stating that it sounded like he was just blowing into the tube, pretending to perform CPR. The prosecution argued that the 911 call, the scene, and Sarah's injuries were enough to prove that Ryan killed her. He forcibly held her underwater by drowning her in a bathtub. The main piece of evidence in the case was the bathtub. Police checked the bathtub for fingerprints and found streaks supposedly left by human hands. The marks were located closer to the middle of the tub. Using a reflected ultraviolet imaging process, fingerprints and smears were found on the tub. A forearm print was found on the tub, and a hair follicle test determined that the print was left by an adult male, but the age of the print could not be determined. The bathtub did not become a major piece of evidence in proving the struggle between Ryan and Sarah. The prosecution went further and told the jury that there was likely a violent altercation that night at the Whitmer home for unknown reasons that the suspect had willfully kept silent about. They called an expert to testify that it was impossible to fall asleep and drown in a bathtub unless illegal drugs or alcohol were involved. According to their testimony, the sensation of water on the face could have awakened the person or caused the gag reflex to enter the airway. If not, the drop in oxygen levels would have caused the person to wake up. Also, the pathologist who performed the autopsy was called to testify.
He testified that if Sarah had a dry body and wet hair, one likely explanation would be that her head was pushed off the edge of the bathtub, toilet, or sink. She could have been pushed either forward or backward, either in running water or in a full bathtub. According to the prosecution's case, Ryan held Sarah's head underwater until she drowned, and on that basis, he should be found guilty of the crime. The defense, on the other hand, has argued Ryan's innocence, primarily because of the lack of motive. The defense continued to fight. It argued that if there had been a violent altercation, as the prosecution argued, there would have been evidence of it. However, there were no injuries on Ryan, and Sarah's fingernails were not broken or chipped. They argued that the injuries found on Sarah were the result of prolonged CPR, direct cardiac massage, and repeated attempts at intubation that night in the house and in the ambulance, on the way to the hospital, and at the hospital itself. At the insistence of the defense, a second autopsy was performed on Sarah. Dr. Werner Spitz performed a second autopsy and again confirmed that the cause of death was drowning. He observed injuries to her neck, arms, upper lip, skull, a lacerated liver, and bleeding on her neck, but could not determine if these injuries were sustained during cardiopulmonary resuscitation. Those present argued that EMTs attempted to resuscitate Sarah for approximately 45 minutes, and that the areas of bleeding deep inside Sarah's neck likely came from an IV that had been inserted into the area because the EMTs were unable to access the veins in her arms. Instead of ruling it a homicide, Dr. Werner Spitz ruled that Sarah's death was undetermined. The defense built its evidence base on the fact that her skin was dry because it dries faster than her hair, by conducting their own experiments with drying out her skin. They also said that when Ryan first found his wife unconscious, he instinctively pulled the drain plug, trying to figure out how to help her, and called emergency services. This sequence of events explains why her body was drier than expected. The water had drained in the bathtub even before Ryan called 911. An experiment conducted by an expert witness showed that a person emerging from the water can dry out in 7 minutes. A second court hearing was scheduled in May 2010. Ryan's father, Gary, said the prosecution had the victim's DNA results indicating the presence of the disease even before the second hearing, but the prosecutor refused to release the result because he did not believe it would have changed the jury's verdict. However, it remains unknown whether the jury's verdict would have changed if they had received credible evidence of Sarah's medical condition that could have triggered the drowning. The official reason for denying a retrial was the jury's error in their investigation. Ryan remained incarcerated. After another unsuccessful court hearing, the Whitmer family was in for an unpleasant surprise. One Jennifer Crew came to the prosecutor's office to testify about Ryan's guilt. She stated that she was a friend of Ryan's, and he was in regular contact with her by phone or email. From Jennifer Crew's testimony, he called on October 26, 2009 at 11:09 p.m. The voice was very upset. He told me that he had beaten Sarah in the living room the day she died. Sarah found out about his philandering life. She saw photos of an inappropriate nature. They yelled and argued for a long time, first downstairs, then in the bedroom. Ryan pushed her in the bathroom and left his wife there without checking what happened to her. He was angry. After calming down, he found Sarah breathlessly floating in the full bathtub. In an attempt to cover his tracks, he wiped up the water on the bathroom floor with towels and came up with a plan about the accident. Ryan's defense fought hard for his acquittal. The lawyers managed to discredit Jennifer's testimony as implausible. After all, there were no wet towels found anywhere in the house, including the dryer. There was no evidence of infidelity in their marriage. The family had no financial problems and never quarreled. Ryan was characterized by friends as a good-natured and helpful person who was never seen even remotely angry. Ryan would not have benefited from his wife's death, as there was no life insurance policy. Before the third trial began, Jennifer Crew was able to be discredited and kept out as a witness. Evidence of her past philandering and convictions for petty theft helped. The call in which Ryan allegedly gave her a confession, too, was not corroborated. In January 2011, there was a third trial on newly discovered evidence.
The defense presented an opinion on Sarah's medical condition that could have provoked the sudden loss of consciousness and resulting drowning. Several medical experts testified that existing conditions of cardiac or neurological defect could possibly have provoked the loss of consciousness, but medical experts called by the state denied these claims. Sarah's co-workers were called to the court hearing and revealed that she regularly slept in her car before starting her work shift at the dental clinic. She was often plagued by allergies and sharp stomach pains. Dr. Benjamin Mesmer, a dentist at the clinic where Sarah worked, said that on the day Sarah died, she complained of both a headache and stomach pain. Later that evening, a friend was talking to Sarah, and Sarah mentioned that she had a headache and pain in the back of her neck, and her friend said she looked very tired. Sarah's ability to fall asleep easily in unexpected places became a well-known joke among those who knew her. One friend even suggested that she suffered from narcolepsy. Narcolepsy is a sleep disorder in which people feel very sleepy throughout the day. Sufferers of narcolepsy find it difficult to stay awake for long periods of time. They must have several brief sleep phases throughout the day to live a full life. Sarah's mother's testimony ruled out the narcolepsy theory. Speaking at trial, as a prosecution witness, Sarah's mother, Ruth Ann Stewart, denied having sleep problems. Sarah was a robust child, regularly monitoring her health. She had a regular daily routine. I never observed her to be excessively sleepy. Medical staff regularly underwent full medical examinations. Sarah worked as a dental hygienist. The last examination carried out during the woman's lifetime showed that she was perfectly healthy. The aforementioned witnesses and testimony about Sarah's regular sleepy state were also inconclusive. An expert in biomedical engineering, human factors engineering, and biomechanics of injury testified for the defense and opined that Sarah's injuries were not consistent with a forced drowning. Had Ryan attempted to drown her face-to-face, injuries to the small bones of the neck and defensive wounds to the arms and legs would have been expected. If he attempted to strangle her from behind, injuries to the victim's knees, hips, and pelvis would have been seen, but none of these injuries were discovered during Sarah's autopsy. The defense argued that they had no explanation for what caused Sarah's death that night, but emergency medicine expert Dr. Dave Smile testified that there are about 300,000 episodes of sudden death each year nationwide, and 1–2% of them occur in people under the age of 35. In 33% of them, autopsy findings were normal, with no evidence of cardiovascular, neurologic, respiratory, or central nervous system involvement. He also agreed with the previous statement that, given the extent of the resuscitative measures performed on Sarah, he was genuinely surprised that more injuries were not found on her body. The jury was asked to consider all the facts of the case and realize that Ryan had no reason to harm Sarah. There are certain situations where people die and their autopsy may never reveal the cause. The defense urged the jury to look at all the facts surrounding the case. Ryan had no reason to harm Sarah. Once again, the defense was defeated. After about 12 hours of deliberation, Ryan was found guilty of murder and sentenced to 15 years in prison. The jury based its decision on the lack of water on Sarah's body and in the area around the bathtub, Ryan's history, and the belief that his 911 call was orchestrated. The third trial juror felt that Ryan's demeanor in court was one of the main reasons he believed he was guilty. When the autopsy photographs were shown, they felt that Ryan showed absolutely no reaction. Ryan did not take a stand, although he addressed the court after the verdict was announced. "I love my wife. I didn't hurt her. I wasn't given a chance. The day after her death, I'm charged with murder. If I had an answer, I would tell you what happened to her, but I can't. I wasn't in the bathroom with her. I love my wife, and I didn't hurt her." Ryan's family has defended him very zealously. They've invested their life savings in lawyers. They picket the courthouse every time he's in court. A tragedy that happened more than 10 years ago still brings like-minded people together. The last hope to exonerate Ryan Whitmer is DNA testing. Genetic material plays an important role in contested and evidentiary charges or exonerations in unspecified deaths. But what makes this case unique is the requested DNA of the victim, not the convicted person. Ryan's attorneys are seeking a court order to disclose the DNA so it can be tested for genetic disorders such as prolonged QT syndrome, LQTS, is a potentially life-threatening canalopathy accompanied by prolongation of the QT interval on a 12-lead ECG, syncopal conditions, and a high risk of sudden cardiac death, which is a disorder of heart signaling that can cause sudden fainting and seizures. According to the Mayo Clinic, young people with LQTS have an increased risk of sudden death. Some people are born with the altered DNA that causes LTQS, and this can occur later in life. Unfortunately, a Warren County judge has already denied Ryan Whitmer's request to have Sarah's DNA tested. Listening to all three trials, I never saw a motive, but again, the prosecutor doesn't need to prove it. It's just very unusual in a murder case to not have any motive, commented former Hamilton prosecutor Mike Allen. Ryan Whitmer is currently awaiting a motion for his release in federal court. Ryan has been in prison for 14 years, and unless a federal judge rules in his favor, his first chance for release will be in July 2025. With each passing year, I hope that next year will be the year that I will be free because I loved Sarah and I didn't hurt her. Innocence of a crime alone is not grounds for exoneration, said University of Cincinnati law professor Donald Custer, who is also an attorney with the Ohio Innocence Project. You have to prove that there was a constitutional error in the judicial process. Whitmer will have his first chance at parole in 2025, but attorneys say it's unlikely he'll get parole because the parole board is most favorable to inmates who are remorseful. But Ryan Whitmer continues to insist he's innocent.